The government delays the economic statement planned for Monday. After the new cabinet meets for the first time, the Chancellor says his tax and spend proposals won't be revealed until mid-November. In his first PMQs as Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak pledges a realistic approach to governing.
Leadership is not selling fairy tales. It is confronting challenges, and that is the leadership the British people will get from this government.
Why doesn't he put it to the test, let working people have their say and call a general election?
The new Prime Minister came under pressure about the appointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. We'll have the latest from Westminster. Also this lunchtime, a call to make childcare a political priority, with a warning that the sector in England is understaffed and underfunded.
I had to quit because my wage did not cover all of their childcare costs, so I literally could not balance the books.
Oh, he's gone. That's exactly what Ireland were looking for.
Shock defeat for England in the Men's T20 World Cup. Ireland beat them by 5 runs. And we meet the twins believed to be the most premature to survive in the UK as they celebrate their first birthday.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, Liverpool struggle with more injury woes as they head to Amsterdam, hoping to confirm their place in the knockout stages of the Champions League.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC News at 1. The Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has announced he is delaying the economic statement due on Monday, in which he was expected to lay out plans for getting the government's finances in order. He will instead deliver a full autumn statement on November the 17th. The news came shortly before Rishi Sunak took part in Prime Minister's questions for the first time since he entered number 10. At PMQs, he came under pressure from Labour about his decision to appoint Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, less than a week after she resigned that post following a data breach. Rishi Sunak said she had made an error of judgment, but he was delighted to welcome her back. Our first report is from our political correspondent, Damian Grammaticus.
First thing on Rishi Sunak's first full day, his new cabinet assembled. It's not really that new, though. The top jobs, like the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, have mostly stayed the same. Many are stalwarts from Boris Johnson and Liz Truss's time. For some, this is a team who are ready from day one. For detractors, it's a retread. Old faces, so where will the new ideas come from? This appointment has drawn much criticism. Suella Braverman back as Home Secretary less than a week after she was forced out for breaching ministerial rules. Behind the smiles, there are serious problems to deal with. So the first decision was to delay next week's announcement on fixing the mess in government finances.
The question is how you deal with that turbulence to make sure that the very, very important and very difficult decisions that I and the Prime Minister have to make are the right ones, decisions that stand the test of time and do the right thing for people at home who are worried about their mortgages, their jobs, the cost of living, the bills and so on.
Rishi Sunak has less political experience than any recent Prime Minister. He only became a senior minister less than 3 years ago. So the question for many is how will he cope in the eye of the storm?
May I welcome the Prime Minister. The first British Asian Prime Minister is a significant moment in our national story. And it's a reminder that for all the challenges we face as a country, Britain is a place where people of all races and all beliefs can fulfil their dreams.
Then, the scrutiny of his controversial appointment.
Was his Home Secretary right to resign last week for a breach of security?
The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government.
I know firsthand how important it is that we have a Home Secretary whose integrity and professionalism are beyond question. So, have officials raised concerns about his decision to appoint her?
Mr. Speaker, I just addressed the issue with the Home Secretary, but he talked about fighting crime. I would hope, Mr. Speaker, I would hope that he would welcome. I would hope that as we look forward, he would welcome the news today that there are over 15,000 new police officers on our street.
That sidestepped the question. The Labour leader turned to the economy.
Yesterday, on the steps of Downing Street, he also admitted what the whole country knows. The Tories have crashed the economy and now somebody has to pay for their mess. I say it shouldn't be working people who've been hammered time and again by this lot.
Mr. Speaker, my record is clear. When times are difficult in this country, I will always protect the most vulnerable. That is the values of our compassionate party. We did it in COVID and we will do that again.
But Labour say it's time for a general election.
The only time he ran in a competitive election, he got trounced by the former Prime Minister, who herself got beaten by a lettuce. So why doesn't he put it to the test, let working people have their say and call a general election?
Our mandate is based on a manifesto that we were elected on to remind him an election that we won and they lost.
Mr Sunak's performance was met with cheers from Tory benches. He'll undoubtedly face more scrutiny over his choice of Home Secretary and huge challenges grappling with the economic issues he faces. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, as we've been saying, the government's economic plan, due to be announced on Monday, is delayed. It'll now happen on November the 17th. Let's discuss that with our business correspondent, Mark Ashdown. Talk us through the reaction to that announcement, Mark, first of all.
Well, pretty calm so far. I think there's a feeling that prudence pays. Look, I can understand people sitting at home will be thinking, here we go again, more uncertainty, more delays, but I don't think there's any surprise to the markets that Rishi Sunak wants to kick the tyres on all of this. So they were expecting it. It is quite stable then. Positive too that this is being upgraded now from a mini statement to a full autumn statement, so we'll get far more detail in theory on how the Chancellor plans to bring about economic stability, how he's going to get growth moving up, how he's going to bring debt down. Also, in his words, he's promising to give people security over mortgages, jobs and the cost of living. In short, promising a clear plan, in his words, that stands the test of time. And we've seen, of course, previously, hasty decisions can have a big impact on confidence and credibility.
Yes. So what happens now?
Well, I've got a few key dates for your diary here. The first now is November the 3rd. That is when the Bank of England will announce its decision on interest rates. Currently 2.25%, of course. We were expecting up to a full percentage point raise to 3.25%. We're now hearing it could go up a bit less, possibly only 3/4 of a percentage point, because, of course, the economic outlook has already started to improve. November the 16th, then, we get the latest inflation figure. That running at 10.1%, of course. There is some hope, I'm crossing my fingers here, that we're getting towards the peak. It might start coming down. And then finally, November the 17th, of course, that full statement now. A few other reasons then why the market is being a bit calm, patient on this, really. Firstly, Jeremy Hunt staying as Chancellor. Firstly, I think that suggests no big surprises ahead on policy. Second is that he's spoken with the Governor of the Bank of England, who understands this decision. Then working in lockstep again, I think, crucial to reassure. Finally, the OBR, Office for Budget Responsibility, we will get their full forecast as well on the 17th. That crucial as well to help us all, I think, understand how this all adds up.
Yes. All right, Mark, thank you for now, Mark Ashdown. Well, as we've been reflecting, Rishi Sunak reshuffled his cabinet yesterday, of course. Let's just take a closer look at who is in it. Of the three main offices of state, two are the same. Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor and James Cleverly stays at the Foreign Office. Suella Braverman is back as Home Secretary. A controversial move, as we've been reflecting here today. She resigned just last week after breaching ministerial rules. Currently, the House of Commons is debating her appointment, in fact. Elsewhere in the Cabinet, Dominic Raab has been reappointed Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister, and Ben Wallace keeps his job as Defence Secretary. Michael Gove returns to frontline politics. He's now back with the job that he held under Boris Johnson, Levelling Up Secretary. And Steve Barclay returns to a job, that of Health Secretary. And Gillian Keegan is the 5th Education Secretary for England since July. Penny Mordaunt, meanwhile, two-time leadership candidate now, remains leader of the House of Commons. Well, our chief political correspondent, Nick Eardley, is following all today's developments for us as ever. And talk us through that first PMQs then for Rishi Sunak, Nick.
Yeah, hi, Jane. So interesting that just hours after Rishi Sunak stood outside Number 10 and talked about professionalism and integrity, trying to make a break with the Boris Johnson years and set a new standard, he's embroiled in a row about professionalism and integrity, and he had to defend the decision at Prime Minister's Questions to appoint Suella Braverman back to the Home Office. Now, the argument you're hearing from the Prime Minister is she made an error, she recognised it, she accepted it, and it's time to move on. But I think it's fair to say that this is not the sort of row that Rishi Sunak will want to be involved in his first full day in Number 10. There was always a question of whether Ms Braverman might get a senior job because it helped bring the Conservative Party back together. She's on the right of the party. That's a side of the argument that Mr Sunak desperately wanted to win over at the weekend. But instead of making a clean break with some of the questions over integrity we've seen over the last few years at the heart of government, Mr Sunak's involved in another one.
Yes, and we hear that as we've reflected, the economic statement is delayed. It's not till mid-November. What more are we hearing about why exactly that is?
Believe it or not, Jane, it might actually be because of economic good news, or maybe just that the news isn't as bad as it was. So a couple of weeks ago, when Jeremy Hunt became Chancellor and started to rip up all of Liz Truss's economic plans, the fiscal black hole that the Treasury thought that it had to fill was around £40 billion. Well, my understanding is the working assumption now in the Treasury is different, that it's £35 billion, basically that it doesn't have as much money that it needs to save. So it thinks that's good news. It wants to give itself a bit more space to see if it can find a wee bit more money down the back of the sofa to make the cuts or tax rises not as bad as they were planned. So that is significant. Just one other thing to flag from Prime Minister's Questions quickly. Rishi Sunak seemed to reintroduce the ban on fracking. He said he'd stick with the manifesto promise, which was a moratorium unless there's evidence that fracking is safe.
Nick Eardley, thank you very much. Well, in his first speech as Prime Minister yesterday, Rishi Sunak promised a stronger NHS, a better economy, more good schools and levelling up. Now voters are wondering how those pledges can be delivered after the mistakes of the last few weeks. Ellie Price has been talking to voters in the Conservative-held seat of Crawley in West Sussex.
We're living through scary times. Even the new Prime Minister thinks so.
Right now, our country is facing a profound economic crisis.
Here, they're used to rubbish jokes about creepy Crawley. But in this Tory voting town, where Labour always come a close second, the Conservatives will be hoping to avoid an election shocker. But it'll all depend on what they think of the new PM.
To be honest, I don't know. I'm losing hope with all of them. And we're being Conservative for quite some time, so I don't know.
Well, it's a change, so hopefully it's going to be a good change, and he'll do something positive for the country. And I'm just excited to see what that will be. And,
you are excited?
Yeah, I am.
Gandhi must be applauding him right now. So yeah, I'm happy for that.
Because he's
well, one, because he's Asian, and it just shows you how Britain has changed, and that's a good thing.
I will place economic stability and confidence at the heart of this government's agenda.
That was the main message. But on half-term, were people here listening?
We need to stop living on the credit card, sort the finances out.
And he says he wants to put economic stability and confidence at the centre of everything he does. Does that instill confidence in you?
No, it's a lot of saying and not a lot of doing, so ask me in 2 years.
I'm petrified to put the heating on. Every week you do the food shopping, it's like, yeah, well, we can't have that this week then, you know, out the trolley.
Trust is earned, and I will earn yours.
He says he's got to put the trust back in the people, and good luck to him, I say. Why not? It can't get any worse, can it, really?
What's he going to do to put the trust back for you?
Well, the bills.
I know the high office I have accepted, and I hope to live up to its demands.
And to be fair, I think he probably will. I think he'll do. He's a very clever man. He's a very clever man, and he did well in the COVID situation. So yeah, I think he'll be all right.
The new PM has been putting the finishing touches on his new cabinet, trying to unite his party. The bigger test will be uniting the country. Ellie Price, BBC News, Crawley.
Directors of public health in England are urging the government not to make further cuts to their budgets. They say local authorities are on a financial cliff edge and that more cuts will hit the poorest communities hardest. Our health correspondent Dominic Hughes has this report.
This is what public health in action looks like.
Hi, I'm Carol. I'm from the Quit Smoking team.
Anthony is a smoker, but with a fractured foot and shoulders, he's now stuck in Gateshead's Queen Elizabeth Hospital.
So how many cigarettes do you normally smoke a day, Anthony?
10 at the most.
So Carol, one of the hospital's stop smoking advisors, sees a chance to help Anthony quit.
We can offer you some patches for your arm.
Yes.
And we can give you like an inhalator, you know, it's something to do with your hands
yes.
while you're...
Yes,
and that's full of nicotine as well.
Carol herself gave up smoking 5 years ago. She understands how hard it can be.
If I can do it, anybody can, and I did it. So you can as well.
And she fears what might happen if this kind of service didn't exist.
I just think people will die sooner because they're not getting the support that they need. And I think now if we're educating the grannies, the mothers, they're going to educate their children not to smoke as well, because it's them that's the future, isn't it?
And on the respiratory ward, the medical team can see that Carol's work is getting results.
If I can help support a patient diagnosed with lung cancer to stop smoking, they live longer, as powerful as having palliative chemotherapy. So it has real impact straight away, being able to offer these services, and if they get cut, it'll just be devastating. It's a critical tool in my armoury.
In England, public health measures like stop smoking services are funded by local authorities, with a grant from the Department for Health and Social Care worth £3.4 billion this year. But budgets have been squeezed hard over the last decade, and now rising inflation means the money is getting spread ever more thinly.
The public health grant has been cut by around a quarter since 2015-16, and with higher than expected inflation at the moment, we're expecting another real term cut this year.
A fresh analysis of what impact that's had on public health spending since 2015 shows where reductions have already been made. Stop smoking services have been hardest hit, with budgets down by more than 40%. Money for adult drug and alcohol services has been reduced by more than a quarter, and sexual health services saw funding fall by more than 20%. And in communities like Gateshead, with areas of severe deprivation, talk of further budget cuts is a bleak prospect.
It really concerns me. You know, I'm here to improve and protect the health and well-being of the population in Gateshead, and actually having some of the limitations around budgets is really concerning. So if you take tobacco, for example, tobacco harm in Gateshead costs about £62 million a year, about £9 million to the NHS. So if we were reducing some of those services that help us to tackle that issue, it doesn't make any sense.
The Department for Health and Social Care says public health grants for next year will be announced in due course. But the worry is that double-digit inflation will mean vital services will be lost and the health of the poorest communities will suffer. Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Gateshead.
Well, reforming the childcare industry was part of Liz Truss's growth agenda during her brief period at number 10. Now, the Early Years Alliance, the biggest membership organisation for childcare providers in England, is urging the new Prime Minister to make the sector a top priority. They say childcare is underfunded and in the middle of a recruitment crisis. Our education correspondent Elaine Dunkley has this report.
At these sessions in Manchester, a chance for toddlers to play and parents to have a catch-up. And it's not just crying babies keeping them awake at night, but the eye-watering cost of childcare.
More than my wage for the day to send them both to childcare, and I thought before I've even left the door, I'm out of pocket. Every week I'm thinking, what can I cut down, or how can I cut down this, and bills, and yeah, it's just endless stress, I suppose, now it really is.
Natasha has also had to make big changes. She was a geography teacher and is now a stay-at-home mum. The joy of having a family has meant giving up a job she loved.
For us, when we had one, she was in 3 days a week and that was £700 a month. Then for two, it was £1,400 a month. I just didn't earn enough for it to cover that, and so I would be going to work and losing money.
So we've got our baby shakers, which our little ones can grasp hold of.
Currently, there is no funding for nursery places for children under the age of 2 across the UK. Low-income families with 2-year-olds in England and Wales are entitled to up to 15 hours per week. All 3 to 4-year-olds can access up to 15 hours a week of childcare, which increases to 30 for working parents. Scotland and Northern Ireland have different entitlements. The government says it has invested £20 billion over the past 5 years to support families and is working on reforms to increase the number of childminders and the number of children that can be looked after in nurseries. This nursery in Salford says there also needs to be a focus on pay for those working in early years.
It's extremely frustrating because we're losing high quality staff who are going off to work in the local supermarket because they get a better pay. And yet really, a lot of the staff in childcare, they're really passionate, they're keen to be here. We're primarily educators and we're here for the well-being of the children and the families. It's such a crucial role and it's so sad that it's not recognised as a profession.
Say hello to my friend.
The government is keen to get people back into work to help boost economic growth. But with some of the highest childcare costs in Europe, there is growing pressure to help parents who can't afford to work. Elaine Dunkley, BBC News.
The time is 22 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. As the new cabinet meets for the first time, the government delays the economic statement planned for Monday until mid-November. Still to come, in the cricket, England suffer a shock defeat against Ireland in the Men's T20 World Cup in Australia.
Coming up on the BBC News channel, there's been a shock win for Ireland at the Men's T20 World Cup as they stun England, winning by 5 runs in a rain-affected game in Melbourne.
NATO's Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says the war in Ukraine has reached a pivotal moment, with Russia's President Putin responding to failures on the battlefield with more aggression. Russian forces are reported to be digging in for extremely heavy battles in the strategic southern region of Kherson, as the Kremlin tries to defend the largest city under its control in Ukraine. Let's go live to the capital, Kyiv, and our correspondent Hugo Bachega. And so Jens Stoltenberg calling it a pivotal moment. Hugo.
Yeah, Jane, the battle for Kherson is likely to be the next big chapter in this war. For weeks, Ukrainian forces have been advancing along the Dnipro River. They're still far from the city, but it seems that Russian forces are preparing the streets for defense. Last night, we heard from an advisor to President Zelensky saying there were no signs that Russian troops were preparing to leave. In fact, he said Russian forces were fortifying their positions and sending in more troops. And these are images showing Ukrainian forces firing at Russian positions in Kherson. As the Russian authorities say, they are evacuating parts of the city. Kherson is one of the largest Ukrainian cities under Russian occupation and the capital of one of the 4 Ukrainian regions that President Putin claims to have annexed. So this is very significant, very important. Now, here in Kyiv and in cities across the country, there are concerns about how the energy system is going to cope as winter approaches. And a third of the country's electricity infrastructure has been destroyed after a wave of Russian attacks. Jane?
Hugo Bachega there in Kyiv. Thank you. A few stories in brief. Researchers in the US have found a genetic link between people with African ancestry and an aggressive type of breast cancer. They hope their findings will encourage more black people to get involved in clinical trials in an attempt to improve survival rates for people with the disease. Shares in the technology firms Alphabet and Microsoft have fallen after they announced slowing sales. Alphabet, which owns Google and YouTube, said sales rose just 6% in the 3 months to September to $69 billion as firms cut their advertising budgets. Microsoft said demand for computers had weakened as business customers cut back. The BBC understands that Ford is to discontinue production of the Fiesta as early as next year. Since its introduction in the 1970s, more than 20 million vehicles have been sold worldwide. But the car's popularity has dwindled in recent years. Ford has refused to comment. Now to the cricket, and England have suffered a shock defeat against Ireland in the Men's T20 World Cup in Australia. They lost by 5 runs at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. The last time Ireland beat England in the tournament was 11 years ago. Our correspondent Joe Linsky reports.
For Irish cricket, just to be here was a breakthrough. A World Cup match at the MCG with England, and they'd come to attack.
Gorgeous shot.
With each 6, the Irish hope grew. They hit their way to 157. Not a huge score, but when England came to bat, they too got in a tight spot. The captain, Jos Buttler, out on his second ball. Now one of the lowest ranked teams in the tournament, believed. England's top batters collapsed. Moeen Ali came in at 67 for 4 and dragged them past 100. But based on Ireland's score at that stage, England trailed by 5 runs.
As the rain comes tumbling down.
The rain meant defeat.
To be turned over by Ireland at this stage of the tournament, so early in the tournament, it really does open up the group. And I think England, they'll be bitterly disappointed to lose today. It was a potential banana skin, but it's the last team they wanted to lose against was Ireland.
It was the luck Ireland needed for a huge World Cup scalp. They'd never been so happy to get caught in the rain. Joe Linsky, BBC News.
Today is the first birthday of twins who are believed to be the most premature to survive in the UK. Harry and Harley were born at just 22 weeks and 5 days. In fact, they arrived so early that doctors had told their parents to expect the worst. But now our correspondent Fiona Lambdin went to meet the family in the run-up to this very special day.
Harley and Harry Crane, born at 22 weeks and 5 days, the UK's most premature twins. They were so tiny, they nearly didn't make it.
Hello.
I had a suspicion that I was potentially leaking fluid, and I went into the hospital just for a check, just to see what was going on. And they said that I was in what's called preterm labour, so I was going to be delivering imminently.
I think
the language was
this
doesn't happen, they're not viable, they won't survive, this is a miscarriage, this will be quick, let's just get it over with.
Harley was the first twin to be born.
I remember saying to one of the nurses, I can't hear her cry, and she said, you won't at this gestation. And I thought, oh. And then at that moment she went, ah!
It was almost like a defiant
as if
answer.
To say, yes, I can.
And I jumped up because I knew then that there was sign of life, so a responsibility to try and save them.
They brought her over to me to have a quick look at her. She was so tiny. I don't think anything can prepare you to see a baby so small. Perfectly formed, but just tiny.
Harry was born an hour later. They were both put onto ventilators and rushed into the neonatal intensive care unit, where they spent the next 5 months. No one expected them to survive.
You had to say goodbye so many times to your babies.
We were advised if you want a christening, it's probably best to do it now. So we did that when they were 2 weeks old, because we thought we were going to lose at least one of them. It was horrendous.
Horrific. The first few weeks, it was literally by the hour, wasn't it? It was literally things would change by the hour.
And after 5 months, in March, they were finally allowed home. And just look at them now. As they get ready to celebrate their first birthday, the twins have caught up and are already at the expected weight of a 1-year-old.
So just to give you a sense of scale, this was the size when they were born. They were 1 pound and 25 centimetres, which is now the length of Harry's leg.
They've got a long list of things that were wrong with them at this stage where they are. We're really happy with where they are. Who knows what's around the corner for them? Trying to remember where they've come from, and if it was a hand of cards I'd fold now, I'm happy, you know. So yeah, blessed.
It's like winning the lottery for me, and I know it is for you. I couldn't want any more in life. This is it. This is as good as it gets, you know. You can't get any better than this. They've made our life complete. You know, happy endings do happen. Miracles happen. This is absolute proof.
Oh, goodness. That is Jade Crane, the mother of Harry and Harley. Happy birthday to them. That was that report from Fiona Lambdin, and that takes us to a look at the weather prospects. Here's Thomas Schaffenacker. Hello.
Jane, hello, and a good afternoon to you. It is so mild out there. Many of us haven't had to use the thick coats for quite some time now. This is not going to change over the next few days. Exceedingly mild weather conditions with this airstream coming in all the way from the southern climes, actually a pattern that we sometimes see during the summer months, but low pressure is also close by, so it's not necessarily sunny all the time. In fact, far from it. We had heavy rain earlier on across many parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland. Most of that rain has now cleared to the north, and we're left with brisk, quite strong southwesterly winds around western areas, but plenty of sunny spells inland, and of course those relatively high temperatures, possibly reaching 20 degrees in the southeast and East Anglia, but even across Yorkshire around 18, mid-teens in eastern and central parts of Scotland. Now, through the course of tonight, those brisk southerly winds continue. We'll see some rain returning to southwestern areas, but again, this is a very mild direction for the air to come from. So 14 degrees in the south, maybe around 9 or 10 in the north. Actually, last night in Swanage, the temperature didn't fall below 16.5, so it's really mild, really warm air coming in from the south. And then tomorrow, early there'll be some rain in the south, which will then move northwards. But if the sunshine does come out for any lengthy period of time, I think particularly around East Anglia and the southeast, the temperatures could actually reach around 22 degrees Celsius. If this does happen, it's not a record, but if it does, we are looking at around 7 to 8 degrees above the average for the time of the year. And actually towards the end of October, temperatures have been known to approach 24 degrees. So we're not quite there, but it's very, very mild. On Friday, a band of heavy rain will sweep across the country. That will give way to drier, brighter conditions through the afternoon on Friday. Again, we're talking around the high teens to 20 degrees in the south to 15. So I think it's the length of this very mild, this very warm spell that's quite extraordinary, rather than maybe the actual absolute values of these temperatures. And actually, if you look at the jet stream through the weekend, and this will probably happen into next week as well, that's where the air's coming from, so these mild conditions in the high teens. But there is a hint that later next week, those temperatures will ease. I don't want to say it's going to turn colder, it's just going to be closer to what we'd expect this time of the year. And from the weather icons, it's very variable on the weather front. Back to you.
Thomas, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And that is all from the news at 1 for today on BBC One. We'll join our newsrooms now wherever you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.